All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 83. I've done this 83 times in a row. So, today, if you've read the title, I'm going to just pull the band-aid off right now. I do not have any secret information about a new Essence20 Giga game or anything like that. This is pure speculation on my part of what I think might be cool. So I just wanted to put that out ahead of time. I have no connections with Renegade Game Studios. Well, yeah, I don't have any connections with Renegade Game Studios. I know a couple people that either have worked or do work there. None of them talk to me anymore, but I know of them. So, let's talk about something interesting. So, on my the Enigma of Combination or Combiner, something like that, the new Transformers book, which, by the way, somehow I have my copy of already. And it's not supposed to launch for another few days, so that's cool. I don't have it in front of me. It's on my bed right now. But I got my physical copy. It's very pretty. That being said, on that video, there was someone that commented about the idea of robots in kind of a fantasy world, because they have a campaign where one of the players basically plays a transformer, but it's a D&D game. And they mentioned that they were trying to find a way to kind of pitch the Transformers RPG to them, and it just wasn't selling. And we had a little conversation about that, and that's not what this is about. I started to kind of pitch the idea, well, if you did want to play a kind of fantasy-based Essence20 game, you could try doing this. Like, you could basically, I would probably use, if you wanted to play D&D, but Essence20, I would probably go with the G.I. Joe RPG as your basis, because they already have quite a few classes that are basically D&D classes. And you just have to make some minor adjustments. Like, all the technology is just magic and stuff like that. Like, it's not horrendously difficult. And then, because the Essence20 games are all kind of intercompatible, if that person still wanted to play a Transformer in a world of Dungeons and Dragons, they could just use Transformer rules for it. And they all work that way. And it's one of the weirdest parts about Essence20 is the Power Rangers RPG is not the G.I. Joe RPG, is not the Transformers RPG. They are three separate RPGs that all use the same core system as the kind of bones of the system. But all three have separate rules for their particular games. So they are three separate systems. However, because they all use the same kind of rule system, they're not super difficult to mix and match, and they were intentionally designed that way. It was designed so that you could have these crossovers between the Power Rangers and the G.I. Joes and stuff like that. So that in and of itself is weird, because systems that all use the same kind of bones for them have existed for forever. Way back in the year 2000, when D&D 3rd Edition came out. Excuse me. Wow, that was fun. Something went down the wrong tube. So, way back then, when the OGL first Giga came out, you started seeing all of these games that were, they called them just D20 games. And there were tons of them. There was a Star Wars RPG that was basically D&D and Star Wars. However, you couldn't take a Jedi character and insert them into a D&D game, because the rule systems were different enough that there would be things that just wouldn't really translate super, super well. And the Star Wars RPG was made by Wizards of the Coast. So that was the most compatible you were going to get. There were tons of other companies that were making other D20 based games. Essence20 does that remarkably well because that's what he was designed to do. However, as I thought more and more about this, one of the things that I realized is Essence20 as a whole is very much science fiction oriented. And what I mean by that is Power Rangers is a very science fiction style show. Like, they have science explanations, it's nonsense science. But they have science explanations for just about everything that happens on every single show, including the more fantastical shows like Mystic Force. Mystic Force still had a very strong kind of science background, despite the fact that it was all about magic. And then G.I. Joe is very heavily kind of a modern science fiction style thing, because it's set in, current times, that they have all this technology that can't exist. And they have all these people that can do these things that they just can't, and they have a science explanation for it. And then Transformers is 100%. It's transforming robots. That's total science fiction. And the only game that has come out under the Essence20 brand that has any fantasy aspects to it is My Little Pony. And if you guys watch my in-depth review of the My Little Pony RPG, it is an extremely different RPG. It's an extremely different RPG compared to RPGs in general. Just RPGs on the market right now are very different than the My Little Pony RPG is very much, friendship is magic. It kind of describes the RPG. It is very kind of social focused. And by social, I don't mean like social, it's not like activist stuff. It's all about interpersonal relationships and stuff like that. Social encounters and stuff like that are the bread and butter of the system. And the system itself is aimed at a younger audience. So it does have kind of a feeling of like baby's first RPG. Forgive me, I, for some odd reason, am just completely stuffed up right now. So, as far as like an Essence20 game with a fantasy setting, it doesn't really exist, because My Little Pony is so unique and so different, and the focus is so different than the rest of the Essence20 games. It would be hard to do a crossover between Power Rangers and My Little Pony. I'm not saying it'd be impossible. I'm saying it would require a lot more work than the rest of the crossover to the type stuff. And so I got to thinking, what would be a really cool license that Renegade could get that they could use to create a fantasy version of Essence20. Because again, there are some fantastical aspects in a few of the systems, but for the most part, they're very kind of hard science focused. So it got me to thinking, what kind of licenses are out there? I first thought about, because Hasbro is the ones that own Power Rangers and G.I. Joe and Transformers. And so I thought about, well, what licenses does Hasbro already own that they might be willing to sell to Renegade in the same way that they or license them, license these other things. And Hasbro owns Dungeons and Dragons. So most of their fantasy stuff is going to show up in Dungeons and Dragons. They would never license those rights away. So I started looking outside of that, and I tried to figure out, what is it that makes an Essence20, makes something work so well in Essence20. And one of the things that I didn't make the connection until I was trying to figure out this issue was all of the Essence20 Giga games have a strong comic book lore. And we could talk for hours about the idea of different let me think of the wars of the game. Different mediums tell different stories well. Things like a television show tends to be a better fit for something. Like a really good example, The Eternals. The Eternals is actually a pretty decent Marvel movie that bombed at the box office. And there are a lot of reasons it bombed at the box office. Marketing was one of them. Another, it was not particularly well written, and they tried to do some stuff with the Eternals that they really shouldn't have. However, I think one of the biggest problems with the Eternals was they were trying to tell a very character-driven story. And that doesn't translate super well into a movie format that also has aliens and explosions and magical powers. So I think the Eternals would have worked significantly better as a limited series than it did as a movie. Because then, instead of trying to tell these very character-filled stories and very kind of relationship-focused stories, all in like an hour and a half to 2 hour time frame, they could have spread it out over 6 to 8 hours. And then the pacing would have been a little bit. The pacing for the Eternals was just real bad. And I really liked the Eternals. I don't think it's a phenomenal movie, but I enjoyed it. And I think if they had a little bit more time and if they get better damn writers, there was a lot of really cool stuff they could have done with the Eternals that I think is now dead in the water. I've heard that Eternals 2 is canceled, but anyway. So comics can tell different kind of stories than TV shows, and comics can tell different kind of stories than movies. The medium is just very, very different. And I think the aspects that make comics as enjoyable as they are, because comics have this really interesting thing where a comic can tell big, overarching storylines, while also having these extremely intimate, close-up interpersonal relationships. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the art style in and of itself lends itself to both aspects, where you can have certain panels that are just kind of close-ups and very, very intimate, and then you can have like 2-page spread panels that are these huge things, and they all kind of work in there. And the very serialized nature of comic books lends itself really well to being able to tell really long, involved stories, or telling very small, self-contained ones. And both of those tend to work really well as long as you've got the right writers. Comic books are very, very good at focusing on the action. And I don't mean action as in explosions and pow, bang, kapow, splat. What I'm talking about is comics will always, because they don't have like transitions like you would have in a movie or a TV show or B-roll footage, stuff like that. They really, every single panel has to tell you something. And so comics are kind of the epitome of, this is the day that something happened. And so because of that, I think with how they've built the Essence20 system, I think the comic aspect works really well with the Essence20 system and RPGs in general, because RPGs are meant to be about the day something happened. And especially more modern RPGs are very much getting to the point where you don't really need to role play out the boring stuff. You are more than welcome to just fade to black and get to the next interesting scene. A lot of the more narrative focused RPGs that are coming out will even have instructions in them where they will say specifically, by the way, you don't need, if nothing's going to happen on the walk to the dungeon, then don't roleplay it. Just wait till they get to the fun part. You don't need to roleplay boring shit. The fact that, and again, all of them have had cartoon series as well, and all of them have been toy lines as well. So it's possible that could be leaning into it as well as why they just work for Essence20. But I really think the aspect of them all having really, really intricate comics, like even My Little Pony, I was unaware that, at least I think, before I say this, I want to see. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't remembering something that wasn't real. My Little Pony has had a comic series for a long time, starting like it's looking like back in like 2013 is when the My Little Pony comics started. Um, so yeah, so anyway, I was trying to think of what is a fantasy license that would fit well with the kind of style of gameplay that is Essence20, which is technically a little bit rules light due to the fact that it's not extremely rules light. There's a lot of rules in there, but it does have that kind of narrative focus where we expect you to kind of flavor things to make them fit your characters better. Possibly that has a comic or something like that would fit into this really well. And I came up with a couple different ideas. The first one I thought about was the Conan the Barbarian series, which would be a massive change compared to the kind of tone that you get with Power Rangers, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. Though if you look at some of the darker, like G.I. Joe and Power Rangers and Transformers comics, it's not that far off. But Conan the Barbarian is a sword and sorcery style comic. It's been around since the 80s. It's been published by both Marvel and DC and some independent stuff. So it's not like it's locked into a particular publisher, to my knowledge. But the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? There's something about it that just doesn't feel very good for Essence20. And I started looking more, and I went on Wikipedia to look at, they have all these different lists and category things to just see what kind of fantasy comic books are out there. There's lots of them. And I finally found something from my childhood that blew me away because I didn't realize it was a comic book. One of the first books that really got me into fantasy in general, after the Chronicles of Narnia series, because I read those when I had those read to me when I was too young to read. They were a big part of my life. But when I started reading books on my own, I was really, really hyper into science fiction. And then I found the book Matameo by Brian Jacques. And I think I'm pronouncing his name right. I don't know, but the name itself is French, and that's how you would pronounce it in French. I don't think he is French, though. And I fell in love with the world of Redwall. For any of you guys that don't know, the Redwall series was a series of books about this little abbey called Redwall Abbey, and the mice and little kind of forest critters that live in it. And they're all anthropomorphized, and it has a very kind of strong fantasy vibe, though it doesn't, there's really no kind of quote-unquote magic. The sword of Martin the Warrior is really the most magical thing that exists, and it's never really confirmed that it's a magic sword. It's just kind of a relic that is lauded and has legendary status to all the mice. And I thought Essence20 could be a really, really good fit for a Redwall RPG. Because again, you have already built into Redwall are the different kind of species of critters already have kind of niches that they fit into. Like the badgers are these really kind of strong, bulky characters, whereas the mice are much more akin to humans in any other setting. And you have like otters and hedgehogs and all that, and they all have kind of like an identity built into them, and that could very easily relate to the role system in Essence 20, where your role might be contained in your critter founding, or at least because there are some like not really sub races, but there's factions and stuff in the Redwall series that might be able to differentiate. But you could go that route, and then your influences and origins could be, you know, where in Mossflower were you from, and that. Or it could just be that, you know, again, the roles could be like, you know, Martin was a warrior, and you have abbots and other things like that. Like, there's a lot in there that you could translate to Essence to 20 to make a really, really interesting game. And things like Merrill of Redwall, which is like the fourth or fifth book that was published, was about this mouse that gets shipwrecked, loses her memory, and she fights off a bunch of gulls that are trying to eat her by taking a rope that she had found just kind of wrapped around her neck when she washed up on shore. She soaked it in water and used it basically as like a flail almost. And so the idea of kind of improvising weapons and kind of changing them and customizing them already kind of exists in Redwall. And so the equipment kind of upgrade system that is built into all the Essence to 20 games would actually work relatively well, where you could design your own kind of customized weapons for your mouse or your hedgehog or your badger lord. And yeah, I thought it would be really, really fun. And recently, Brian Jock unfortunately passed away, I think in 2011. So he's been gone for over a decade at this point. But the Redwall series has been licensing out the Redwall IP to a couple different things. There are, I think, 2 new Steam games, 2 new computer games that you can get on Steam that are original stories set in the kind of world of Redwall that came out in the last couple years here. And Netflix is currently, or at least it was a couple years ago, was currently working on creating a new Redwall animated series for Netflix. And back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a Redwall cartoon that actually it lasted for 3 seasons, and it covered 3 of the books. The first one, I think, was the first book, Redwall. Season 2 was the book Matameo, and season 3 was, I think it was Martin the Warrior or Mossflower. I can't remember which one. So obviously the people that hold the rights to Redwall are currently licensing it out to various things. And another thing that Renegade does in general is any of the licenses that they get, they don't do one thing with it. Power Rangers. Power Rangers has the RPG. They have a deck building game, of which I have... where am I deck building? There it is. I have 2... I have the game and then an expansion pack for it right there. They have a board game called Heroes of the Grid. And so Renegade doesn't just do one single thing. They do a bunch of different things. Transformers is the same way. There's a deck building game. There's a bunch of other things. G.I. Joe is a deck building game. My Little Pony has a deck building game. So there's lots of stuff. And I think the Redwall IP could very easily translate into an RPG and also into a board game akin to something like Mice and Mystics, which is a phenomenally fun board game. It could easily be turned into a deck building game because there is a litany of characters that have existed in the Redwall universe. So they would have a ton of things that they could use to create various cards and things like that. So, yeah, I think that would be a really, really cool fantasy-themed Essence 20 game. If anyone from Renegade is watching this, reach out to the people that own Redwall. I don't know who that is. I don't know if there's like a Redwall holding company or something, but somebody is licensing out the IP right now. So get in contact with them and make us a Redwall. Obviously, Renegade could also create their own fantasy world and their own campaign setting, but they don't really do that. I don't think any of the RPGs they currently have are original anythings. Like they have the World of Darkness, which has existed since the early 90s, long before Renegade existed. So I don't really think. And creating your own campaign setting is a lot of work, like a serious, like, fuck ton of work. So I sincerely doubt that Renegade would ever create their own custom setting for Essence20. I could be proved wrong, but that's based on their history. I just doubt that would happen. But yeah, I think that would be really cool, and I would like a fantasy-based Essence20 game. I think Essence20 is really, really fun, but it is all science fiction. Again, aside from My Little Pony, which is its own damn thing. So I would really, really love something that leans much harder into fantasy, magical style stuff. Yeah, I'd like to see that where that goes. But I'd like to know your guys' ideas. What do you think would be a cool IP that Renegade could turn into an Essence20 system that is fantasy based? My other thought was I love the world of Medchemia, which is a book series written by Raymond D. Feist. That was actually based on his own. I don't think. I believe he like basically homebrewed his own rules. But he played an RPG at home with his friends, and that was the world of Medchemia. And then he started writing books about it. Very similar to how Ed Greenwood started writing. He started Forgotten Realms as a D&D campaign setting, and then started writing books in it. So despite the fact that Medchemia actually has closer roots to D&D than it does Essence20, I think it could make a really interesting Essence20 game. And the Medchemia series is over. Like Raymond D. Feist wrote the final book. I believe it's called Magician's End, that I've yet to read, but I've read almost every other. I think there's a grand total of 3 or 4 books from the entire series that I haven't read, because they're amazing and wonderful. So that was another thing that I thought might be kind of interesting. The idea of like the lower path magicians could fit with the equipment system pretty well, just because of how lower path magic works. So anyway, I'm interested to hear what you guys think. What would be a cool IP? What would be a cool fantasy IP that you would like to see Essence20 turn into an RPG? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.